Hey everyone, Temporal here, and today we got a question, or there was a question in the competitive subreddit about how much do coaches coach? And given that I am a former contenders coach, North America, South America, Australia, I've done work in Europe, but we'll call that less official, etc. Given that I've done all of that, I have some insight into this. I didn't see any other professional coaches had tackled it, so I said, hey, let me go ahead and help these guys out, give them a little bit more insight. If you guys have questions about anything I say here or anything that I don't elaborate on enough, you guys can throw that up in chat now. I'm going to sort of go through and give a bit of an answer to this, and then I'll go back and visit chat. And then what we'll do from there is then we'll go ahead and answer any comment type stuff that came up in the thread as well before going back to chat again. So if you want to get here, you can absolutely get in here by going in chat. If you want to jump to the front of the line, do super chats, all that good stuff. But from here, we see how much do coaches coach? From a gameplay standpoint, how much of a team's play comes from coaching? Is it for basic things like composition and counterplays, or does it go all the way to positioning, timings, and ability usage? Are set plays planned on the fly from players, or do coaches have notes on plays they need to do when the situation arrives? Just curious on how much does coaching affect a team strategy, such as the fuel having good rotations and ult usage, etc. Excuse me. Okay, so here's how this works. I'll answer these and then I'll get more general. Like I'll answer these one by one and then I'll get more general. Is it for basic things like compositions and counterplays? So yes, it is going to cover basic things like compositions on a coach-led team. And you do have two different things here. There's coach-led teams and there's player-led teams. And when I say coach-led, it tends to sort of be org-led, but we'll call it coach-led and player-led. So on a coach-led team, yes, your coaching staff is very likely to determine, okay, what composition or compositions are we specifically working on? So coach is figuring out what compositions the team is working on in general, in a new meta, in a meta that they're working on, whatever the case may be. So it might be, okay, we're playing Brawl, or we're playing Double Bubble, or we are playing Talon Dive. And by Talon Dive, I mean the Moira, Lucio, Winston, Diva, and then some combination of Reaper, Sombra, Echo when we had bans, Tracer type thing. Are we playing the Zen Ball strategy? Like, what are we playing? What comps are things that we're working on? That is something that in a coach-led team would absolutely be figured out by the coach, as well as determining, hey, on which maps, offense versus defense, are we going to start on which compositions? We might have planned, okay, if they're giving us trouble on this, we'll swap over to another comp because, hey, we've planned from a coaching perspective if this doesn't cost us very many hero swaps and it'll answer if we're getting countered and we're pretty good at this second composition or whatever the case may be. But yes, in a coaching-led team, you would absolutely see that happen, and I have done that for many teams that I've worked with. You can also have player-led teams happen. And in player-led teams, the coach would probably have heavy input in that. This is assuming a player-led team that has a coach and a player-led team that actually has a coach is still something resembling a real coach and not as just a cheerleader trying to get clout by having their name attached to a team that they hope does well, because that happens too. But in a player-led team with actual coaching, the coach is still going to be there and they're going to make recommendations. Their recommendation might be weighted about evenly with other leadership players of the team. And it's not like the players are like, oh, we elect you as captain and therefore this is our leader on the team. It's human social dynamics, and you find someone who, the person who tends to be your fight planner, for example, or maybe your person who's calling your targets and rotations, they'll naturally end up as a bit of a leader, thought leader, etc. on their team. And it might be weighed relatively evenly between these things, and the team will come to some sort of consensus on what they want to work on, how they want to play, etc. But the coaches, again, assuming they're not just along for the ride trying to get some clout, the coach is absolutely going to have some level of input. And on a coach-led team, they will flat out pick these things. They will listen to the players. They will take feedback because coaches are not infallible, but they will pick these things. Like, it's been long enough now that I can say this with problems. When I worked with Sydney Drop Bears, I can guarantee you that we were picking the compositions. We as the coaches were picking we're going to go ahead and play goats here, and on this comp we're going to play it like this, and we're expecting Sombra goats or we're expecting a poke dive composition, and if they give us this is how we're going to rotate out of it in terms of swaps, etc. Like that was something that you absolutely do. You absolutely are having, hey, the coaches are picking the compositions, picking what's getting trained, etc. Okay. Or does it go all the way to things like positions, timing, and ability usage? So yes and no. It does go to the level of that, but only when it has to. And what I mean by that is the players do play these compositions. Even when a meta's fresh, players are still laddering, and they're still laddering a fair amount because your scrims are your practice time as a team. They're sort of your most valuable practice time, but they're also your least flexible practice time. You can only practice scrims at scrim time. You can't just go, oh hey, I've got some energy left, let me go scrim more. That's not an option. So so the next best thing you have is gym time, or in a physical sport it would be considered gym time. And that would be, I'm going to do some cardio, I'm going to do some weightlifting, I'm going to do some stretching, whatever the case may be. Overwatch's equivalent of that would be, well, I guess I could go do like drill type stuff, but really Overwatch's version of that is hopping on the competitive ladder. Yes, hopping on the competitive ladder is no better in the Overwatch world than doing cardio or weightlifting. It is not prime competition. It's not even serious. It is literally, hey, I'm hitting the gym. The scrims are better than the gym, and the matches are what really counts. But the the ladder, the competitive ladder, the competitive match mode that so much people tie up their, oh, my SR, it's worth everything. Oh, there's stress around this. Not stressful, doesn't matter. That is literally just like, okay, this is a place we go to get to work on specific things, to get to do our reps, etc. So they're playing these compositions even when a meta is relatively fresh. They're playing something resembling competitions quite frequently, pretty quickly. But even if they're not, they're going to go practice what they're trying to practice. My point from all that is they are going to, because they've played their hero touch a bunch, because they have some idea of how the game works, because if the coach has done any good at explaining why he wants them to play the composition, even after a brand spanking new meta where he's making a bit of a guess on what the best composition is, if he or she has explained at all what the point is, the players are going to intuit pretty well just by having played their hero where they should go, when they should do things, etc. And then as they keep going, they'll keep getting better. And coaches will go adjust this stuff. They'll adjust this stuff mid-scrim. They'll adjust it in VOD review. They'll adjust it in one-on-ones. So yes, the coaches will go in and adjust these things, but they frequently don't have to, because these players are pros and they do figure it out pretty quickly. They're making adjustments themselves pretty quickly, and making some of these adjustments is going to be less important for some of them than it is for others. So it may take a while for the coaches to get there, even if there's a staff, because they're working on other more macro things, or they're working on things that are causing the composition to fail earlier on, like, hey, the main tank's mispositioning is causing the whole thing to fail faster than the main support's mispositioning, for example. So the players will adjust this stuff on their own. The coaches absolutely will come in and make adjustments to this, but the real answer to this is you're working with good players when you're talking about pros, and a lot of this will be fixed before the coaches get there. If the coach had to fix every single thing on everything, if the coaches were literally like, let me make sure every inch is perfect on everything, and the players didn't at all get there from the macro explanation of what the coach was looking for, the coaches would never get the execution clean enough for the players, for the comps to make sense, to work, any of that. So I hope that answers the question. Are set plays planned on the fly from players, or do coaches have notes on plays they need to do when the situation arrives? I don't know that the coaches so much have notes on the plays that they need to do when the situation arrives. I mean, it depends what we're calling set plays. Are we talking about like, hey, our Diva's going to throw self-destruct, and when Diva throws self-destruct, Ryan pins the other Ryan so that they can't block it, and yay, we got a thing like that? Like, you could call that a set play, sure, but when we're really talking about set plays, we don't consider that much of a set play. You'd sort of call that a mini set play, I guess, where, hey, this is something that's been practiced, the specific play has been practiced, but that's a very copy-pastable play where we can do that in a lot of places on a lot of maps. That's not really like a set play of that type of set play is fine and is something that gets practiced, but the level of set play of we've seen that this person stands here, which, on this team, which we think we can punish from our scouting notes, so we're going to go do that, that less so. But if we're talking like the copy pastable set plays, those are something to get practiced, sure. I don't know. I mean, some coaches, I guess, would make notes on them. Yeah, you'd make notes on them to teach how to implement them, I suppose. There's no set way on how coaches take and do notes. Like coaches go through a lot of iterations of figuring out, well, should I do my notes like this? Will do I ever go back and look at them if I do them like this? Well, should I do them like this, simpler? Should I do them like this, more complex? Well, I go back and look at them, but then are they something that I can distill out to my player? Like coaches, that's something that I think coaches struggle with figuring out how to do because the game keeps moving. It's not like, oh, you have forever to prep for something. You're prepping for the next match, and your players are changing beings. They're getting better and worse at stuff, and what needs to be done gets changed. So that's a little complicated. Set plays aren't so much planned on the fly, though. Is it? Let me rephrase that. So yes, you would come up with things like, "Hey, we're going to have the ability to do, like I said, a self-destruct pin play. That's a pretty basic thing." Or we're going to have the ability to go, "Hey, our grab self-destruct." Or we're going to have the ability to maybe have this is our Reinhardt. This is our diva up above on high ground over here. And this is the opponent's Reinhardt, and he's got his diva behind him and his Lucio behind him, whatever. And maybe we've got the rest of our team filling something resembling a concave over here, and now our diva is going to come through and knock this out. Yes, that's a thing that could happen. That could be a set play, but again, it's a pretty copy-pastable, lift and droppable set play, and it's not going to be a, oh, you do this set play every time X happens. It's going to be a, hey, this is in your pitch selection, if you were thinking about it in a baseball terminology, where, hey, the team understands, the caller for the team understands that they've been given this deck of cards, this pitch selection, etc., and they understand when this pitch, this, hey, we're going to diva boop in their Rhine is powerful, and they're going to go, hey, that's something that I can select depending on our ult status, their ult status, what we need to do. Maybe we have no ults and they have a bunch of ults, and we need to start the fight early because it's the only way we can win this fight. Something along those lines. So yes, the coaches will develop that, but the coaches aren't going to have ironed out, okay, and this happens and then you do this, and this happens and then you do this, and this happens and then you do this set play, and this happens and then you do this set play. It's not that fixed of a decision tree that's being given by the coaches to the players. That is simply put not how it goes, because your players are independent. You do have to understand that your coaches aren't actually in the match with your players. Your coaches do not have the ability to calm during matches, and now in fact they turn off the coaches, like they turn off the coach's microphone. And now in other things the coaches usually just mute themselves, and it's a little bit honor system, which you hope everyone else on other teams is following. But given that your coaches aren't in there in the match with them, and given that players are, more flexible than this, and you have to have solutions for what if the other team does something completely wild. You don't want your team to fold because the other team did something completely wild. You do have to accept, hey, you need leadership within the team. It's not even in a coach-led team. The coach still isn't there in the match, so the players have to have some level of leadership. They have to have someone that is calling there's doing primary target calling, but more is doing the fight planning, and that fight planning is important. And hopefully that fight planner has worked with the coach and understands the coach's vision of, hey, how the game is supposed to work, what they've been trained towards, etc. If they don't, there's a friction issue that needs to be solved, but they have that, and then with that, they're able to make adjustments in scrims, in matches, all those things. And coaches understand that they won't be there for the matches, and in scrims, well, coaches will absolutely comment between rounds, and sometimes coaches will comment and make calls while a match is happening. Sometimes I've done that, for example, to get a fresh team's target calling jump started, to remind them of to show them what target calling looks like, and to really get it jump started if it stops type thing. But as you go on with a team, coaches will mostly try not to call things, not to make comments during actual scrim portions, and save that for between rounds, because teams have to be able to solve problems for themselves. And yes, they're doing it within a framework of, hey, the coach wants us on this composition, but the coach will often remove those locks and say, hey, you guys can make swaps. You know that you know how to play these three types of compositions. Or, hey, we're comfortable with so and so's Genji if they want to go do that, etc. And they have that. It's not a rigid straitjacket that the players are playing within from what the coach has given them. So I hope I've answered that to everyone's liking regarding set plays. If not, you guys know the drill. Throw them up in comments, and I'll catch up on the comments shortly here. Um, but yeah, it's not that rigid. Just curious, how much does coaching affect a team strategy? Hugely, hugely. Because again, in a coach-led team, the coach is picking what comps are being practiced. They're picking, very much from the macro. Are we playing to dive? Are we playing to counter dive? Are we playing in general to do it like this? And again, they might be building it out specifically as pitch selection, and then they might turn it over to the fight planner to go, okay, you know how to play your double bubble. You know how to play this where you go, hey, we understand our Winston goes in at the same time their Winston goes in, and we're playing like this specifically to punish their Winston. We also understand when our Winston can afford to not go in and afford to counter dive their Winston because their backline is out of sight, because we practice that specifically. And finally, we understand how to go, nope, we're actually trying to win the front game where we're trying to win in their backline, less trying to win in our own backline, and we're doing it with our nano, with our primal, etc. Like that could be, okay, we're getting into the pitch selection here, where it's these are three sort of different things that could happen in a double bubble engagement that you could specifically be playing to make happen type thing. And it's a coach who's going to have a lot of input in setting that up, and in some cases in forcing their team to one trick a strategy for maybe an hour of a scrim, maybe an entire scrim, maybe for a map of a scrim, maybe for the first map of a scrim for 3 days to sort of one trick a strategy to get it. And then they've got, again, that selection of things that they can call to use there. So I've sort of gone through this. I'm going to give a little more in terms of what general setup for, because this says how much do coaches coach. I'm going to go into one more thing, which is sort of what coaching looks like. And that would be like how a coach is using their time with a team, or how a coaching staff is using time with their team. And then I'm going to catch up on comments here. I've done another video on this. If you guys want to look through my channel, you can search for it. But what we've seen in terms of how coaches tend to spend their time, or at least when I was in the scene, because I'm not professionally coaching in Owl or Contenders right now. But when I was in the scene in Contenders, and before that, sometime in Tier 3, what you would see is you would obviously have scrims 6 days a week. So that's scrim 6 days a week. And for a Contenders level team, that would be generally 2 blocks on each of those 6 days. So 6 times 2, that's going to be 24 hours of excuse me, not 6 times 2. That's going to be 6 times 4, because you've got 2 2-hour blocks each day. So that's going to be 24 hours of just scrimming per week for a team. Now, you might remove one of these days because it's a match day, it's an official day, something like that. You're going to have one day off, and you might then drop one of these days if we actually have a match, something along those lines. So that's basically 24 hours of scrimming per week, and the coaches are going to be there. Well, some of your coaching, you may divide up your coaching staff and have some people there to do some scrim coaching and other people there. Maybe they're doing opposition research, maybe they're doing scouting, whatever. Depends how you've set up your coaching staff, but pretending that you're running with one coach running the team, you've got that. Then on top of this, and this again, they're not doing a ton of coaching during the actual, hey, we're playing Nepal Sanctum, but between Sanctum and Shrine, they're getting coaching in. And remember, well, I know people object in lower level scrims to, do your coaching between scrims, things like that. No one at a serious level cares. If a team's going to take 2 minutes between rounds to do coaching, so be it. That's why the scrim codes have the ability to add time, to start within 5 seconds, etc. Because the expectation and the understanding is that you get some of your most valuable coaching done in coaching done when something just happened, when you can be like, hey, this just happened. Now, you don't want to get too distracted about going into what just happened. You do want to have a bit of a forward, let's talk about the map that's going to happen, because it's going to be a while before they get a chance to go adjust to what happened on the previous map. They're not going to see Sanctum again for a while, probably not until the next block, for example. So the coach is going to make notes on that and then actually try to revisit that if he's worth his salt. before the next sanctum, when he has that break before the next sanctum, like right before the next sanctum, but he might talk briefly about that and then lead the team down what to do for the next thing. And he might take 30 seconds for that. He might take 2 minutes for that. You could take 5 minutes. If you start taking 5 minutes too often, that actually does start to wear at teams a little bit, even in things. But you can take the occasional 5 minutes, and that's going to be just fine between rounds in a scrim environment. Because remember, the success of a scrim is getting better. It's not about, oh, yes, we got through 6 maps as fast as possible. Aren't we the best? That's not the point of a scrim. It's really not like the most reps, it's the most useful reps that you can get. Then beyond this, you're probably looking at VOD reviews. And VOD reviews can take different formats. I've seen teams at this level. Now, in OWL, they may do a little bit more than this because in OWL, they can mostly support themselves with just OWL pay. But in Contenders, you're working with people who are potentially students, are doing this as second jobs. The pay in Contenders is not good enough. And I'm sorry I can't give you guys the OWL numbers, but I can't give you the OWL numbers because I'm not there. Now I can talk to, now I of course have contacts who have been there. I have a pretty good idea of what it's looked like, but we've also seen people be like, ah, yes, they're practicing for 10 hours every day. And no, they're not. No, they're not. When you include, like, okay, well, we're taking an hour for lunch and we're taking an hour to exercise, it's like, those are good, important things to do. They're part of being an athlete. Breaks are part of training, but some of the numbers that OWL coaches or players have put out in there in the past are just not real. Okay, so then what you'd look at is VOD reviews. And I've found most teams will do 1 to 3 VOD reviews a week, and these are team VOD reviews. I'm sorry, I've got my poor mouse plugged in here, which is laser is just not working very well. Let's swap that guy real quick. Sorry about that, guys. So you're probably looking at, what did we say, 24 hours of scrims, and then 1 to 3, 1, 2, 3. This was 6 times 4 hours a day. And VOD reviews should be about 30 to 45 minutes, so you're probably looking at about 3 hours here. And with this is going to be maybe 2 of these, maybe 1 of these, maybe 2 of these are going to be more macro stuff. And this is, you can look at what is the team doing, what is something that the team's struggling with. Maybe they're really struggling to actually get good value out of their high noons. Maybe their rotations are a problem. Maybe they're ulting too heavily into lost fights, and that's setting them up to lose the next 2 fights. Most of the time you're going to do this VOD review, you're going to have prepped this VOD review as a coach, where you're going to have gone in there and said, hey, I've looked through a couple of our past scrims, a couple of our past matches, whatever, and I'm going to grab 1 or 2 of these, mix them together. I have timestamps that I can jump to and show a couple team fights, and now we're going to use this as the backdrop for our discussion of how we're going to make our ult usage better, for example. And it's not just generically ult usage. It might be more specifically not ulting as heavily into lost fights. It might be more specifically, hey, we need to work on our high noons and our windows because we're not getting enough out of these poke ults in Brawl, things like that. And it's not like, oh, well, our McCree needs to do it better. It's the, how is our whole team going to enable this? If it's just our McCree needs to do something better, we'll take that off into one-on-one VOD review, which is another topic that we cover. It's how does the team better enable this? How do we work this better into our plans? How are we going to use how are we more consistently going to use our Mei wall to boost this up? Or are we going to use our Mei wall differently to go, hey, let's get theirs out. We high noon, they answer with high noon, we wall, and then we counter with window type thing. Like other things like that that you'd get into. And so you might do 1 to 2 of these a week. You're not going to do this before every single scrim, at least in my opinion, because what you run into is players need time to implement this. You can't just be like, hey, here's the thing, work on it for a day, and you're guaranteed done, because you don't know what your opponents in a scrim are going to resist you with. Like if you specifically are working on your double bubble versus double bubble matchup, that's something that you were covering in VOD review, and your opponents, turns out today's opponents are one-tricking Brawl, well, you didn't actually get that practice. And you didn't necessarily know that they were going to one-trick Brawl, because maybe they completely pivoted what they were training, how they were doing things. They've had an epiphany and they believe this is the route when they didn't before. Something along those lines. Or they're trying something wacky. They're trying Bastion sim strats, whatever the case may be. It's a little annoying, but teams absolutely do it. And hey, that's what you're going to have to deal with, unless you want to blacklist that team. And generally, you're not going to blacklist a team over something like that. So you're going to have situations where you need to actually give them time to implement it, to work on it. And that's why it's usually a couple times a week for VOD review, not every single day, because you do actually want to keep them on that topic. And teams won't always implement stuff as quickly as coaches might like. That's fine. And then the third one, or the last one, might be a more specific map review thing. Like, hey, this is now, let's specifically cover playing Blizzard World as Brawl into Poke, because we see that it's been a couple times now that we've struggled to play Brawl into Poke. How are we better going to use the closed space? Let's specifically walk through the places we can stage from, the closed spaces that we can use on Blizzard World, and let's as a team walk through, okay, we can win the fight around this closed space. Now after we've won it, we can push the cart here, and then we can force the next fight around this closed space, etc. And that gets into a map specific thing, and that absolutely happens. And then finally, you get into the individual VOD reviews. So I'll call these one-on-ones, and you might do these with a player. You might do these with every player once a week. You might do this with every player twice a week. You might do this once with every player every other week in contenders. Part of this actually depends on how much coaching staff you have that is comfortable doing micro work, because this does get into micro work. This gets into, can you make your team, can you make your players Doomfist better? Can you make your players Mercy better? Can you make your players Widow better? Yes, I can do all three of those things. Those are very different heroes, but I do not have infinite time. So what can the rest of my coaching staff do? Is the rest of my coaching staff comfortable with that? And I've had times where that wasn't true, by the way. I've had times where earlier in my career where I was not comfortable doing all those things. So I would have to work with the other coaches and say, okay, I'm comfortable working with this person on their Zarya and this person on their Rhine. Can you go work on this person with their Pharah? It wasn't actually Pharah, a bad example, but whatever the case may be. So that absolutely happens, and then it becomes a thing of, okay, well, we're going to do this because we do need to individually level up our players. All the macro is great. Macro wins games. Macro is fantastic. If you're 30 steps on a 100-step ladder ahead of the other team on the macro, yeah, you're going to crush them. But you know what? You're not usually going to be 30 steps ahead of another team on the macro. You're going to have to get all the micro stuff to line up, because the micro leads to the macro. It really does. Like going, hey, if we're talking goats, our Zarya is constantly 15 energy ahead of your Zarya, is constantly 8 ult charge ahead of your Zarya. Like that stuff adds up and turns into, okay, we're snowballing off of this. So that is important, and leveling up your players, that matters. Sometimes it's just, okay, they've got better players than us. Now, in metas like GOATS, it's very rarely that. GOATS was very, very much a macro difference type thing, coaching difference type thing, and anyone who says otherwise, well, wasn't a very good coach. But you do run into other metas, like more poke-based metas, where, hey, how good your player's aim is actually matters. How fast your players' flicks are actually matters. Now, there's still tons you can do in the coaching world of, okay, what are we doing in terms of piggybacking, like this player peeks over here, which leads to an opening for this player to peek, which leads to an opening for this player to peek. What are we doing in terms of establishing the correct angles to have the most angles? Like, what are we doing? That stuff all absolutely matters. Did we replace a poke with a flanker? What is that flanker doing in terms of timing to open up distractions? Like, all this stuff absolutely matters, but we do get more into, on this backdrop, the player's individual skills that are harder to train than some of the stuff was, say, in GOATS, for example, do matter more than they do in something like GOATS. The individual skills that are harder to train, the how fast are their flicks, how good is their aim, that type of thing does matter more, and that's fine. But my point is, you got to keep leveling up your players forever as a coach, so that your players don't get left behind. And they also have to level themselves up. This is, again, doing the competitive. Players who drop competitive, you want to be worried about. Players who go like, oh no, I'm doing enough in scrimming, I don't need to play competitive anymore. Yes, you do. I know it sucks. I know it's not nearly as fun as scrimming. I know it's a worse environment than scrimming. You gotta keep doing it, unfortunately. Until we find other better forms of training, it's currently the best substitute, unless we're all going to agree that we're going to scrim even more. But then you run into one-on-ones, and this could be, let's say that you're doing one-on-ones with 6 players a week, and they're going to be an hour each, and you're going to do that, and you're going to work through those, and that would be, hey, one-on-one with 6 players, and that's another 6 hours a week. This 3 hours is misleading because while I'm labeling this as 3 hours, this might be 3 hours with the team, but there's prep work that'll go into this. So let's double this. Let's make this 6 hours actually, even though it's only 3 hours with the team, because the coach, if they're worth their salt, are going to double the time that they're spending on this to go, hey, I'm actually prepping this so that we're not just spending time watching a match, we're jumping to places that they've already picked out that illustrate what they want the team to work on. So this is like a contenders level coach trying to do everything themselves, and this would be what, 36 hours in a week? So how much does a coach? I guess the answer to that would be, if we're not including matches, we're only doing this. We didn't pick up a third scrim any day. We didn't pick up a warm-up scrim. We're doing each player once a week here. We're not doing any of the subs or anything like this. We're at, 36 hours would be how much does a coach. That's not actually what the question was. The question wasn't really about time, but I thought including time made sense since that's how the question was phrased. But okay, with that out of the way, I am going to catch up on chat now, guys. As you guys know, if you want to jump to the top, if you want me to interrupt and react to and that's like 36 hours while they're working an actual job elsewhere, because Contenders doesn't pay squat. Like, really, it doesn't. Okay, so I'm going to catch up on chat here. If at any point you guys want to jump to the front of chat, super chats are the way to do that. If you guys are enjoying this content, please do like and subscribe. Those buttons are right down there. Don't cost anything. They're awesome. I do appreciate it if you hit them. And also, if you want to click through to this thread and decide, you can upvote, downvote the top thread. You can upvote, downvote my post to give it more or less visibility. That's totally up to you guys. But I do appreciate it if there is more visibility here, because because hey, it helps. It helps to bring more people in, give us a bigger audience, give us more interesting people to talk to in our chat here. Okay, so Crunch says, "Oh, this is interesting. Probably can't ask." Probably can't ask many questions since I don't know much about it, but definitely interesting. Some work time temporal. I can picture someone in an aim trainer and temporal standing behind them with a whip, and if they're not getting 90% headshots, he beats them until their aim improves. So you want to be careful about, like, oh, you have to have 90% accuracy or something like that, because what that tends to do is that tends to cause players, if they're like seeking a number, it doesn't cause them to aim better. It causes them to not take shots that they're less confident in. And you want to be careful about that, because you don't want your aim's not going to get better by not reaching for harder shots. So you do want to be careful about setting numbers like that. I know that's not really what you were talking about there, but hey. Before he retired, the scarf was a whip. Ouch. How do coaches come about in a new game? Like football's over a century old, whereas Overwatch is 5 years old. Seems hard to come up with what a coach should do for a young game, especially Season 1L. Yeah, it was challenging. And that was what you saw in Overwatch. In Overwatch League, the very first coach, or not in Overwatch League, in pre-Overwatch League, because we had Apex, not Apex Legends, but Apex was probably the peak of Overwatch. Apex was probably the peak Overwatch tournament. Not probably, it was the peak Overwatch tournament before OWL existed. And it happened in South Korea, and for the later seasons, you'd get a few Western teams invited, but what you'd be looking at there is, during that era of coaching, you'd also have some Western tournaments that would be equivalent to today's monthly contenders type tournaments, and what you would look at there is, coaches tended to be either, you've successfully coached a different esport, you're a good player who for some reason decided immediately that they wanted to pivot over to coaching, or you were recording VODs for the team, and you went, well, I'm going to sort of take the title of coach on myself. I'm actually the VOD recorder, but I'm going to take the title of coach, and my team isn't stopping me. At the beginning of professional Overwatch, those were sort of the 3 categories of coaches. And none of them were amazing. This was probably the best category, came over from another game, but there wasn't enough general Overwatch understanding yet. There wasn't enough general stuff, so like all of this really struggled. all of this really struggled. That was the thing. You also had a belief in the community that you had to be good at Overwatch to be able to coach Overwatch. You had to be a really good Overwatch player. So Krusty would have struggled if people knew Krusty's rank back then to coach 4 teams, because it was very much a no, you have to do this. You still see some of that, like tier 3 teams going, or even lower than tier 3 teams, like tier 4 teams going, must be at least 4,200 to coach, and it's like that's not how it works. So less was understood. Coaching really wasn't very good. Like, to be honest, coaching really was not very good. And some of those teams that won those early games would just get obliterated by teams nowadays. Like, absolutely obliterated. There's still some great memories from back then, but they would get obliterated just on understanding of the game and how it's evolved in terms of angles, in terms of synergy, in terms of, how heroes can actually be overwhelmed, all those sorts of things. So, in terms of getting good, well, you sort of have to pave the way. I mean, I wasn't doing serious coaching during this era, but I was doing serious coaching probably just after this era. I was doing some less serious coaching at the tail end of this era. And you just have to figure it out. I mean, how do you get good at it? Well, you learn the game, and you learn the game from a what actually makes it work standpoint, not, what is, going up the ladder, not, what do people think is good. You actually figure out what's working, what's good, and you eventually make the breakthroughs, and you figure out what are actually the good sources to learn it from. And there were a couple good sources out there as time went on, and now there's way more good sources out there than there were when I came up as a coach. Like, there's people like me out there who talk. There's people like Spilo out there who talk. There's people like Natter out there who talk. Some of the OWL coaches will sometimes talk. Like, Spilo's an OWL coach now, so I guess that's same thing. But like, there's way better sources. Not some of those sources are wrong, by the way. Like, some of the sources, when they say things, are still wrong about things, but that's what you do. You found the sources that were good, you upgraded, and then you developed your own understanding of the state of the game, and you created your own structure of this is how the game actually works, and you checked that against, okay, this is my belief of how the game works. It's sort of in this box. It's sort of like this, and now let me go check that in actual matches. Oh, it didn't follow my structure of how the game should have worked. Do I need to evolve my structure, or do I see why? I can't actually run a real experiment because I can't constantly have my team go scrim this specific way, etc. They might not be able to get good enough fast enough to do it, and they have their own record, practice, etc. to worry about. So let me use this sort of, instead of as an experiment, as an observational study to see what happened in these pro games. It didn't go how I expected to, or it did go how I expected to. If it did, that reinforces. If it didn't, well, why didn't it? Do I need to throw out my theory of the game, adjust my theory of the game, or do I need to dig into this deeper and see, oh, well, it would have if this person hadn't majorly messed up like this? Okay, well, if that's true, can I go find a different game where they didn't mess up majorly like that, and does it work out the way I expect? Like, that's sort of how you had to do it. You just had to go, hey, there's still a lot of tape out there, even if the game is at this point 5 years old, but earlier in the day was only 2 years old, was only a year old. There's still a lot of tape out there, and yes, the patches change. Yes, it's not nearly as stable as a football, a basketball, a baseball for its rules. Not that those haven't, or soccer for its rules. Not that those haven't had changes, but the rule sets have been much more stable than what you've gotten in competitive video gaming. But yeah, that's how you do it. Seems hard to come up with what a coach should do for a young game. Yeah, and in some ways, I think one of the things that Overwatch struggles with is Overwatch still mostly goes scrims. Scrims are the way to practice, and scrims are good, don't get me wrong, but if you look at how you practice for baseball, for example, you're not running constant scrimmages against each other. You're not, for baseball practice, just constantly going, well, let's play the game against each other. You're doing more targeted drills to improve on things. And that is something that Overwatch struggles with, because Overwatch has not found amazing drills to do that actually help. Now, some of that is because Overwatch itself is such a team-based game, more so than baseball, for example. But part of that is because it's fresh, it's new, it's something that you can do something resembling sort of a scrimmage and competitive ladder where it'll just find opponents for you more quickly. But it's not like professional baseball teams can't just drag out, their can't drag out their AAA team, can't drag out their warm-up team and go, well, we're just going to practice against you constantly, and that would cost them basically nothing, and they still don't. And it's because there's more value to working on specific drills to improve on a specific targeted thing that you're working on as opposed to this, which is what we get into. We're not there in Overwatch yet. I hope at some point we will be, but mostly we aren't. The upgraded workshop codes did help in that regard, but we're still not there yet. Now the scarf is repurposed as a badge of honor to show the blood of the top 500 hit scans. Hey, Bluix. Okay. Blux could tell you guys about some of this stuff. I don't know that he will, but he played EU contenders. He could tell you some of this stuff. We've had sports movies for decades. When do you think we'll start seeing esports movies? I think we've had a couple. I remember there was a series like shoot, what was it? There was a series that was about, it was clearly an esport, like an MMO RPG Warzone type thing, esport. I think it was something that came out of Asia. It wasn't a movie, it was a series, but it existed. It was King's Avatar or something like that. That might not be its name, but it existed as a TV series. And then I think we've probably had some documentary stuff going here as well. So we might not be having the we don't necessarily have the angels in the outfields of esports yet, but we'll get movies. Yeah, they've released a bunch. Unless you're looking for a specific game, right, which would have to be bad because most movies are based on video games are bad. Right, that's basically how it works. Sonic was surprisingly okay. Sonic was surprisingly okay for a movie based on a video game. It might be the first hey, this is okay as a movie that was based on a video game thing. It's extremely difficult to make a movie out of a game because they take away from the experience without adding anything back. Right. Oh, and I'm going to catch up. I see Railth is here. Perfect. Nard's question is interesting to me, actually. I know roughly progression from T3 to T2 to T1, but how does that progress actually go from coaching? Like, how does transitioning from each tier work? Oh, transitioning, I didn't see Nard's question there. Did I miss it? Oh, really looks like a different question. I see how you got there, but that's a different question. To move up the scene in Overwatch, what you have to do as a coach is you either get promoted yourself because you were coaching a team that was in tier 3 when it went to trials, and then you were coaching a trials team when it went to contenders, and that would be your way up from tier 3 to tier 2. Tier 3 through tier 0.25 to tier 2. That's a thing that you could do. You could just be on the team, be coaching it as it moves up, and voila, you've found your way up. Congratulations. But the other way that you can do it, and this is how I actually moved from tier 3 to tier 2, is you send enough players up. And this is also pretty much the way you have to move from tier 2 to tier 1 because there's no promotion from contenders to Overwatch League. So you go work in tier 3 and you go, hey, I worked in tier 3, my team didn't make it, we got wiped out in trials, or we got wiped out in open division playoffs, whatever the case may be, but I was coaching two teams in tier 3, one in NA, one in EU, for example, and I sent one player up to contenders from NA and 3 players up to contenders from EU. And it's not like I sent them up, but I was coaching them when they moved up. And they've worked with you and they know you're a pretty good coach. And then when their teams are looking for additional coaching or looking for help, etc., you do get a little bit of, oh, hey, we know this coach, he was pretty good, etc., and you get a little bit of word of mouth spread like that. And maybe you then get picked up as a result of that, maybe you don't. You also have the situation of you put that on your resume that you've sent players up there, or okay, you got a bunch of open division playoff finishes, or you've done a bunch of time in trials, because people look around Wikipedia to see, okay, who's out there that we don't know about. But it's like anything, it's about what does your marketing look like? Who knows what you know? So like you may know the best stuff in the world, and but if no one knows that you know the best stuff in the world, no one's going to think of you when they're looking to build their new owl team, whatever the case may be. And then you run into again in contenders the same thing. So you might be in contenders, and I've players that I've worked with have absolutely gone to owl. And then it becomes a question of, okay, what causes you to get looks? And okay, you get looks in part because either you stack up, oh, look at this collection of hardware you've gotten in terms of high placements, but also, hey, you have players who are now in Owl because players get moved up to Owl more frequently than coaches do who go, hey, this guy's good. Like, this guy's good. We should consider getting him. Like that's how it works for coaches. To be perfectly honest, it's you get looks because of your hardware, and you get looks because your players are saying we think this guy's pretty good, and management is constantly trying to evaluate their coaches now, going, are we losing because our coaches are bad? Are we losing because our coaches are bad? And when Owl teams talk to contenders coaches, and this is how it works, it's because they're worried about their coaches. I interviewed for a GM position for yeah, I can say this now. I interviewed for a GM position in Overwatch League, for example, and they were definitely worried about their coaches. And they were asking me, because I had coaching experience, what can you tell us? Are our coaches garbage, etc.? Like they're constantly worried about that thing. And one of the things that they'll do is they'll talk to players to go, hey, are there other good coaches down there? Are there gems that we haven't found? I mean, the team that probably does the most gem looking in terms of taking chances, maybe not gem looking, but taking chances on people who haven't accrued a bunch of hardware like this is probably Boston, but Boston has a bit of a different format than everyone else when it comes to doing things. So that's sort of the answer to your question there, Crunch. Um, Okay, so Rilth does reviews. If you guys don't know, you should definitely check out his content as well. Bastion Sim is valid on every map in L. Other teams just won't let you practice it in scrims. Changed my mind. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any coaches, to your knowledge, who spend 70 plus hours a week doing coaching, prep, etc.? In Overwatch League, yes. In Overwatch League, there are, and I'm not going to get into them. In Overwatch League, there are a couple who have done. Well, do you say consistently? No, you don't say consistently. There are, especially going into specific phases of Overwatch League, there are. But again, that's Overwatch League where they can actually make their entire life Overwatch. That is not contenders, and that is not on a contenders coach salary. And if it is on a contenders coach salary, they simply shouldn't. Like, I'm sorry, but contenders coach salaries, I'm not going to tell you guys exactly what they look like because, yes, it's something that you negotiate, and yes, it differs from org to org, but contenders coach salaries are simply not good enough to justify 70 hours a week. Full stop. Full stop, they're not. Even with, oh, but you have the chance of going to Owl if you do well, they're not worth spending 70 hours a week. Like, yes, that is a judgment decision for me. Someone else could choose to decide otherwise, but I would strongly recommend against it. But even Owl, no, you're not doing 70 hours a week every single week. I've seen contenders coaches also who have done, a 70-hour week or two, the occasional 70-hour week, but that's like literally, okay, this is your week heading into playoffs, and yes, you are on a salary type thing. Um, but mostly you get some exaggeration going. You get some exaggeration going because what you run into is coaches don't know how to prove that they're such a good coach other than their team winning. So, and you don't always win. Even if you're the best coach, you don't always win because you had worse pieces than the other guy. It sucks, but your org spent less money on pieces, or they selected their players before you got there, whatever the case may be. Or maybe you're a great assistant coach, but your head coach is garbage, or vice versa. So you're in these situations where, well, how do you prove how good of a coach you are? Well, that's kind of a thing that we tackled earlier. Of hopefully players say that you're good, hopefully, but you don't want to just suck up to players to get them to say that they're good either, because because then you're not coaching them effectively. Like the scene can't just be about, oh well, I hope my players like me. That's sort of like the VOD reviewers that we were talking about that became coaches, being none of the players objected to it was fine. Those aren't real coaches. Like, it can't be about that. So coaches run into, how do we prove that we're good? And one thing that people do, and there's especially a lot of this in America, is they mix up like, well, I work hard, I put in a lot of hours, and therefore that's proof that I'm good. And it's not. People care about your results. It's not actually a question of how many hours you put in. It's what do your results look like. And putting in more hours doesn't always equal more results. And you have to be strict with your players on this, because some of your players will just try to grind the game forever and they will burn themselves out. And you have to be strict with them. You don't want them to drop competitive, but you have to be strict with them to not let them burn them. You have to be strict with some players to not let them burn themselves out. And you can run into very similar things with coaching, where some coaches will get into but I put 40 hours in this week. I put 60 hours in this week. I put 70 hours in this week. I'm working so hard. The coaching definitely isn't the problem. Well, the coaching could be the problem, even if you're putting in 70 hours. So, do you answer your question, Ralph? Yes, 70 hours will sometimes happen in OWL, and yes, I have heard from a source that I consider reliable. 70 hours in contenders very occasionally, but no. Consistent 70 hours, not real. Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, when you do work 70 hours, you start getting inefficient. You start getting inefficient in terms of what you're doing. You simply do. Where's Adam with temporal sex? Suppressing fire is a thing, absolutely. Also, I've been approached to spend 20 hours a week coaching a tier 3 team for $50 a month. Should I value my time more than 80 cents an hour, or am I just worthless? Yeah, Ralph, right? Right? It's great. Definitely value your time more than that. Remembering that Plat team wanted freebie coaching, that was a fun video. But at least they discovered the error of their ways. And they had someone on staff who either really realized it was wrong or was smart enough from a PR standpoint to go, oh shoot, we need to say that this was wrong, that we didn't understand why Overwatch was like this, and that we found it kind of weird. They had the good follow up at least. Nod says, when I was in Drumline, one of the biggest factors for selecting players at additions was not how good they were, but how quick they made changes. Yes, and that is exactly how people get good at Overwatch and good at coaching. The best Overwatch players are not the players who spend, you spend more total time, or even your current skill levelers here. The people who got good at Overwatch are the people who are able to rapidly make changes to their gameplay. The people, when I talk about, after in most reviews, hey, spend 5 to 15% of your brain power working on something for somewhere between 5 and 50 games, these are estimates. The players that can consistently do this in 5 games for most things are the players who go pro. There's a little more to it than that, because yes, aim mechanics are a little bit different. Yes, humans have different reaction speeds. Yes, humans require different amounts of sleeps. There's different things that go into this, but mostly the players, the people who can learn the fastest and implement the fastest and make changes to their habits the fastest are the ones who go pro. And that's exactly the same thing there, Nard. That baseball analogy is fantastic. I just understood that 10 times better now. Do you mean my pitch selection or my training thing about how baseball teams don't just constantly scrimmage each other? Rail Overwatch Coaching says, I think the practice should be theory, drills. In real scenarios, scrims. The problem is the players need to perform the drills themselves. There's no cone set out to practice. Yeah. Uh, that was a terrible movie, Indie Struck. We're not even going to talk about that. Sonic was created by Jim Carrey. Okay. Coaches in all high level sports. Coaches in all high level sports is the first rule to have turnover when the team starts losing. Yes, that is normal. And it's become a little bit of a problem in modern day sports, because you sign coaching contracts for like 4 years for millions and millions of dollars, and then you're paying 3 coaches millions and millions of dollars at the same time because you've turned them all over. And eventually, what actually happens there is you discover, wait, it's actually management that needs to roll over, because you've changed out your coaches and you've changed out your players, and this is the problem, but management isn't going to change itself over. And that happens in Overwatch too, guys. I'm not going to get into it, but that happens in Overwatch as well. I've Definitely seen that happen. Um, and no, that is not me saying I've been fired. I've never been fired from coaching an Overwatch team. That everyone knows they have a gem when I coach their team. I have left coaching teams, but I have never been fired. But I have seen, maybe I was up close to it, maybe I wasn't. I have seen teams where it is management that is absolutely crushing this team's ability to develop. Games like Cyberpunk can be worked on for years and turn out completely wonk. Quality is not tied to the time you spend on something. That is true. Drumline, best movie ever. Sonic sure as heck wasn't carried by whatever the other guy's name was, the friend who was the cop. Okay. You can't not talk about bad video game movies. That's like 95% of them. Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so we're caught up on YouTube chat here. So I'm going to do a refresh here, and we're going to go ahead and look at comments here to see if there's anything interesting in comments. Remember, if you guys are liking me covering this topic, please do like and subscribe on the channel. But also, you can click through. I did make the Reddit thread the first link in the description, and you can either give this thread more or less visibility, as well as give my comment down here more or less visibility, because it doesn't have very much visibility right now. And I think this is useful insight, the conversation that we're having here, that these guys would probably like to see. So here we have, like all esports, it's impossible to know as an outsider since the coach's responsibilities differ a lot from team to team. In some, the coach is basically an analyst. In others, he's a glorified cheerleader. Sort of. In mature esports like CS, you see coaches being more like coaches from professional sports in terms of responsibility and power. Citation needed. But in relatively new games, that's far more rare since most people who understand the game at a deep level are still playing. This was true in like the first 9 months to a year of the game. We are well past this point in the skill curve. In the coaching curve. We are well past this point in the coaching curve. This was true in the beginning. And this was more true for CS then than it was for Overwatch. 4.5 years ago, this was more true for CS than it was for Overwatch. We are well past that. There are coaches out there who absolutely understand this game and understand this game very well who are doing coaching, or who understand this game, did coaching fine, and have now moved on. Like we are well past this point. This point existed back when it was mostly, hey, your VOD reviewer is now your coach. Your seventh player decided not to be on your bench and decided to be your coach, but he, wasn't good enough to be a starter, so you don't listen to him in the first place. Like we're quite a bit past that. But we're not completely past that. And the reason we're not completely past that, or how you know we're not completely past that, is we do have a lot of teams that choose to run without coaches or choose to run player led rather than coach led. And a lot of that is happening because there's not enough quality coaches around. And part of why there's not enough quality coaches around is because the scene isn't healthy enough. Like part of this is an issue of the scene isn't healthy enough, and coaches like me aren't willing to invest the time. Like you guys may notice, I'm an owl level coach, but no question I'm a contenders level coach. I have, finishes with phase two, Sydney Drop Bears, Fury, all top three placements. No question I'm a contenders level coach, and you'll notice I'm not in there to coach in contenders right now. And it's because the scene isn't healthy enough. There's not enough money in the scene to justify the effort that it takes. So that's something that, hey, that's one of the reasons that you don't have enough coaching going on, and and teams are choosing to be player led rather than coach led, actually to a greater degree than they did in the past. And the other reason you have that is a bad coach really will sabotage a team quite badly. A bad coach will sabotage a team quite badly. That said, players can also absolutely sabotage a team. They certainly can. Players can certainly go, oh, we lost this match. We're all going to decide that this player is to blame. Let's bench them. What? Huh? That's not what happened. Your guys' macro strategy just sucked. But whatever. Or the other team's strategy was specifically to pick on that player and you didn't help them. That player didn't underperform. You will see that happen as well. Um sort of. It's impossible to know as an outsider. This is sort of true. Differ a lot from team to team. No, the format I just gave you for what coaching looks like is pretty consistent. It's not 100% consistent, but it's pretty consistent. Obviously, on a more player led team, the coaches maybe going to do less. Maybe they're only going to do one on ones with some of the players. Maybe they're only going to do macro coaching. Maybe they're only going to do micro coaching because they have specific responsibilities. But what I generally gave you guys is what happened. I didn't get too much into like mental or performance coaching. I didn't get too much into that because that's you don't really set aside specific blocks for that. You have to sprinkle that in everywhere, at least in my philosophy of coaching. You have had teams that have specifically had, hey, this is our mental or performance coach. You will have that. But other than the fact that I didn't cover that very hard, what I covered is basically what happens in coaching. You might divide it up between different coaches. You might go like, hey, instead of doing a one-on-one with a player, we're going to do a one-on-three, where it's like, hey, the coach or the role coach or the micro coach is covering with the main tank how to play Winston, how to specifically work on their melee weaving with Winston, and the other two people who play tank on this team are gonna sit in and watch because they might as well, type thing. You could have a format like that, or you could have the one-on-one, or in theory you could have, okay, we have our micro coach actually leading it, we have our head coach sitting in on it but not actually leading it much, and then we have the player. Like, you could do different formats like this, and you could do different formats where like, hey, your strategic coach is meeting with your head coach before to determine what the VOD review is going to look like and who's going to lead the VOD review and things like that. But basically what I covered is how it works. Again, I can't know what I don't know. I can't know on teams that I haven't been on, but I do talk with other coaches. I have talked with other coaches. I go try out for teams to figure out, is this a team that I want to be on, and I see what does it look like, etc. Like I have seen a fair bit. What I've given you is not far from accurate. Um, this will happen for the people that are along for the ride, but I want to be careful with this phrasing because this really is underselling mentals. Like, it really is important to control your team's mentals, and you will see me being quote unquote a glorified cheerleader on match day sometimes. Because that is the right role for a coach to fall into on match day because you're not in there in the comms with them. There's not a ton you can do, and controlling their mentals is really important because if your team is performing at 90% mental capacity, they will win, and if they're performing at 60%, they will lose because a lot of teams are close enough that that's just the case, and you will have a natural rhythm. Some days your team is going to mentally be better, some days your team is mentally going to be worse. So this can be an actually very important role for how does your team perform. Now, I don't like this role so much on other days. I don't like this role so much on other days, but on match day, this can be a very important role. Okay. That's just a joke. One coaching provided, same joke. Eternal question, no one knows the exact answer to. It's also individual coaches too, sort of. We've only seen a handful of coaches in OWL who have consistent success, and we have no idea why. Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's the thing. Even if they're an amazing coach, you are still, what does your management look like? What do your players look like? And we've seen that, and that's not like controversial. We'll see that for Hall of Fame coaches, managers in other sports where they might have a Hall of Fame record. They might have they go into, the record books thing, but they still had teams that had garbage records. They still have teams that they worked for that were terrible. They still have terrible years. That happens. There are other factors than just coaching. Coaching might be the biggest. Coaching works well because it's like a single piece, especially in football, for example, that can have a really big impact that you can change as just a single piece. So it's a way to make a really big swing. It's a potential to make a really big adjustment to the team just by moving one piece, but that one piece isn't always the problem. So, yeah. But it's a reasonable first place to target, absolutely. Um, Right. And having the best players is big. Like, it really is. Having the best coach is big too, but having the best players is big. We won't either know until either a good one retires and does an interview. I mean, I'm not sure we'll even know then. Like, do we need Krusty to retire? And did we need Krusty to retire before this year, before we would have considered the coach good enough to qualify for that? Like, what? This it feels like something where the goalpost will constantly be moved. But okay. Um, Applying any success or failure to a coach without any words from players is like blaming or praising God. See, that's tough too because are those players retired? Do those players have a future in other esports that they need to think about? Are those players going to be playing the hey, it's generally good not to come out negative? It's generally good not to go negative because it sort of prevents other people from going negative on you. Like we don't want to throw stones. So yeah, our coach was great. Like you gotta be careful here. I wouldn't put too much word in what players say unless they've shown themselves to be very candid. And a few players have shown themselves to be very candid. But even the ones who go too much, you go, wait, are you really being candid or are you being sensational? So this is a tough one because they're still in the spotlight. They still have sponsorships, other things to think about. Future playing in other games, all that. We know that some of them do as little as helping with mentals. Guys, don't undersell this. Like, seriously, don't undersell this. I have coached teams where, hey, it's, for example, phase two up against Skyfoxes. Whether phase two or Skyfoxes won entirely had to do with which version of phase two is showing up today and which version of Skyfoxes is showing up today. You might be able to go, it's 55-45 one way or the other, but like it has to do with whose mentals are better that day. Like it's not we caught you with a trap strategy, you caught us with a trap strategy, we're consistently better than you, and those happen too, but like don't undersell this, guys. Like this absolutely matters, especially on match day. More like a motivational speaker than an actual coach. Are we not familiar with locker room speeches? Have we not seen sports movies? Come on, guys. But again, this is not me saying that this is everything either. Like I'm poking at this because people seem to be underselling it in this thread. It's not everything either. Like mentals are not going to cause you our mentals are good, so we're going to go beat the Shock today. We're going to go beat Atlanta Academy today. No, you have to have actually done the work and had your base level of play at a level where you can beat them. But once you're in the same tier, your mentals matter. And that absolutely you do have to absolutely put in the work, understand how the macro works, how the micro works, level up your players to individually be good enough to go head to head, have the correct macro strategy, give them enough choices and pitch selection to throw off the other team. Like you absolutely do have to do other stuff here. Like I don't want to oversell this either. You can't just be like, we had more confidence and we believed hard enough. That's definitely not enough by itself either. You absolutely have to do the work, but on match day, the mentals are key. And sometimes the mentals are key if they enter a losing streak too, where you actually have to balance the team's mentals a bit just to remind them that they know how to win. Because most of the time, you're actually in a hey, we're trying to get them to work on specific things. But if they hit too long of a drought of rough scrims or losing scrims to teams that they should be consistently beating, you sometimes need to fix things too. But anyway. Okay. Impossible question to ask. Speculation if you. Depending on the team, it could be none, some, or all of the above, and more. I don't think there is a singular coaching method for Overwatch. I mean, it doesn't vary that far from what I explained, guys. From good coaches, anyways. Micro coaching. Not really a standard. Every coach has their own style and focus. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean every team does. Yeah. No, I assume coaches will rarely be better than the players themselves, and this individual coaching would be rare. No, I've already addressed that. That's very wrong. Like, yes, the individual players are better than the individual coaches at playing their heroes, but that absolutely does not stop coaches from doing micro coaching at whatsoever. Whatsoever. But like team coaching, coaching the rotation, do you know what coaching the rotation means? Okay. Looking at the meta, where is the team going to hold? What is the game plan? Who drops on point? Who takes the high ground? Yes, coaches would cover all of that. Right. Right. You don't need to be better than someone to coach them. NFL has plenty of position coaches who never played past college. Exactly. Okay, someone she added with Wheats from American Tornado, who apparently beat L teams consistently. Yes, American Tornado was beating L teams consistently. In my era of coaching, Atlanta Academy was beating more than half of the L teams more than half the time. The top contenders team is getting owl scrim time and is getting good, and it creates a different world. That's not unusual. Um, he said all he really does is help out with mental, i.e., yeah, and we've always known American Tornado is a player-led team. That's not really news. I think it was announced that college is actually that. I think it's the school that Wheats is going to. He's been selected as their coach, and that's supposed to be some big intimidating thing. And it's like it was a player-led team, man. Like it was a player-led team. Um, so yeah, and that's fine. Players are allowed to have player-led teams because they don't want to be sabotaged and they don't trust or they haven't been able to find a good enough coach, or maybe they've been wronged in the past by coaches, and that happens. There's bad coaches out there. I totally understand that. I know some of the players on American Tornado, and I know some of them definitely would be quite fine with a more coach-led team, or at least with a more coach-led team by the right coach, but that's perfectly fine. Right, very player-led team. It is. Weeds did coach us last year in L. We did look far better than this year for what it's worth, although our roster was slightly better. Who is this? I don't see a check mark. Okay. Weeds did coach us last year in L. Okay, fine. Depends. Some coaches are more like the motivational speakers. You guys have to ease up on this topic. Like, this is what tends to get more seen because this is what coaches are willing to publicly talk about, like in post-match interviews, because that's sort of the role they've taken on game day, and it's a case of that's sort of what's understandable. But that's the same thing you'd see if you looked at basketball. Like, they're not going to be talking about, oh, this is how we were setting up our 3-point post plays. Like, no, they're not going to be talking about that. They're going to be talking about, oh, well, we were really in it. We knew if we tried hard, etc. Like, that's just how post game interviews are and such. So I think the fan base has a bit of a wrong impression or a bit of an over focused on emotional, mental stuff perception. But I understand why that would be the case. Um, oh boy. The players are the experts on their chosen heroes, not the coaches. Yikes. The coach's job is to first and foremost look at the macro play of the players. Coaches do generally start from macro, but macro informs the micro. But the players are the ones tasked with making sure their plays fit into the bigger plan. Not really. No, the coaches make sure that the players are playing. Like, the players should understand the macro well enough that the coach laid out to go figure out themselves how to do it. But the coaches will absolutely come by and adjust it to make sure that their play is fitting into the bigger plan. If for some reason they're having trouble doing so, which coach can adjust the plan, they could, or what's this? Try to advise the player. No, they will advise the player. To the best of their abilities? No, 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 no. You were so close to being right. You were so close to saving this post. You were so close, but just not quite there. A lot of coaches will coach micro too. It's much easier to watch a VOD and point out mistakes, optimizations, than to actually play the hero at the level. Yep. Pro coaches spend literally days studying, even if it's just picking up on things other pros are doing and relating those to their players. I'd be surprised if there weren't a significant number of coaches who helped their players improve individually as well as looking to plan micro and such. Absolutely. There absolutely are. I'm not saying every coach is great at micro. They're not. But players once they realize have a good coach absolutely love it when you work on their micro. They can sometimes be a little distrustful at first, and that's why one of the reasons you get player-led teams. They can be a little distrustful at first, though oftentimes you'll have them absolutely like first thing they want is, can I get micro? Can I get individual coaching for me, etc. Which I understand. You move up to Owl as an individual player, not as a team. And as soon as they sense that, wait, this is actually useful, this is good, this is helpful, they absolutely want more micro, even if it's on a hero that the coach, of course, doesn't spend any time playing on. Again, like, I have coached players on at very high levels where it's like, okay, we're working on Widowmaker with one player, we're working on Mercy with another player, we're working on Tracer with another player, we're working on Zarya with another player. These heroes all play very differently, and I've worked with players that are better than me on each of these heroes, and they absolutely wanted more coaching. Wait, can we do more frequent micro work, etc. But again, that's not like, oh, tooting my own horn. I expect this is true for other coaches as well. Okay. Um that's my post. I'll do a couple more and then I'll come back to chat, guys. If you guys have more to throw up in chat, you can do so. I will circle back to you. Quite a bit is the answer you're looking for. In a messy composition like Double Sniper, Fair Tracer, rely on individual skills. Microplays aren't as important as setting up sightlines and crosshair fire. That's true. But in GOATS, coaches analyzed every aspect of pro play. Yes, we did, including cooldown usage, timing, and rotation speeds. You sometimes see pros on stream making fun of their DPS duo for putting down. You sometimes see pros on stream making fun of their DPS duos for putting down slow sim TPs. Yeah, you absolutely do. And we did. Like, if you guys watched Sinatra was generally thought to have a good Zarya before GOATS came around. And then I think it was US versus UK in the World Cup. And Sinatra's team absolutely got crushed that year, and they just got crushed, and it was bad. Like, they did okay with their Pharah Doomfist stuff, but any place that they couldn't run that, they were getting crushed in the Goats v Goats. And if you went back and analyzed that, you would see that Sinatra kept getting punished for 1 second bubble cooldown differences. He repeatedly got punished for 1 second bubble cooldown differences repeatedly by the UK team. And he leveled up a bunch after that. He went and worked with Krusty. He got back to, hey, absolutely top form Zarya. But, like, yes, it got really deep in terms of cooldown timings and everything in Owl. Or not in Owl, in Pro Overwatch. It also depends on the team as well. Sometimes the coaches just help the players chill out. They have dedicated macro and role coaches. Yes. Planned on the fly as an oxymoron. Those are almost certainly rehearsed. Yes, as long as we're talking about, yes, mostly true. It's not necessarily planned for every specific point, every specific team fight, but it's, hey, this is a play that we know how to do, and we can copy paste this play with most of its pieces intact in a lot of different situations. It's in our pitch selection, as I like to call it. Okay. Honestly, I think Grand Finals last year was a coaching difference. Even in one of the most chaotic comps we've seen, it was a clear rhyme and reason to Shock's play, despite the fact that I think Seoul had more individual pop-off. Shock's system was more consistent and allowed them to grind more value over the course of a game. I think good coaching matters a heck of a lot more in every meta. It's just coaching may not matter too much to your team if your coach isn't that good, or if you just have more talent than the opposition, you don't need it. Yeah, there's some truth there too. Okay, and then we get down to my comment, which sadly only had one upvote when I refreshed it. That makes me sad, but okay. And that's fine. Okay, so now let's catch up again on chat here. If you guys have anything else you want to put in chat, get it in now, because I think we're approaching the end of this one. Okay. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Profit maximizing rule applies to time usage with things like coaching playing. Yes. And what Nardstorm is referring to here is this 70-hour versus 30-hour versus 65-hour versus 40-hour type thing, where you applying an additional 20 hours to work with your team because, yeah, it's totally real for people to spend 40 or 50 hours working with their team, but you spending an extra 20 hours to go to 70 is not providing very much additional benefit in the overwhelming number of situations. Occasionally you get something. Like, you get like, hey, we thought we were all prepped, we thought we were all good to go, and then we got information last minute that this team is going to play completely differently than we prepped for. And you better believe we're putting an extra 15 hours in to fix that. Absolutely. But that is the exception, not the rule. Is Al something you'd like to move into? For the right offer, I'd do it, Crunch, but it's not something I'm actively pursuing. Like, it is not something I am actively pursuing. It is something I would do for the right offer. And that could be in a coaching role, that could be in a GM type role, that there's different ways that I could do that, and I'd be okay with that. But I am not actively grinding the coaching ladder, and I'm not actively applying, to be perfectly honest, because the truth is, when you actively apply for owl coaching jobs, it's a lot of work to get results, where it's a lot of work and it's a lot of unpaid work, and it depends on the situation. If you tell me that, hey, I'm in the final five and now we would like you to do 20 hours of work, for example, to, head to head against the remaining four contestants, no problem. That's how it works. That's fine. But I've unfortunately seen situations where, hey, we've invited 50 people to try out, and now we would like you to do 20 hours of work for free. No, no, you are not stealing my work when there's still 50 candidates in the pool. I'm sorry. You can interview me when there's 50 candidates in the pool, but I'm not doing free work for you when there's 50 candidates in the pool. Again, I value my time more than that, and as a conceptual thing, as a pride and work thing, I don't believe that's how things are reasonably done type thing. I simply won't do that. Again, you tell me, hey, we want to do this when you're down to like 3 people in the pool, 5 people in the pool, little bit, sure. But if I'm really worth it to you, you guys should be paying me, to be perfectly honest, because you're absolutely using the results of my labor. You're absolutely using the results of my labor. If you ask me to run scouting simulations for you, you're using that. And everyone knows you're using that. Anyway, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So to answer your question, yes, I would do Owl, but it would have to look pretty much just right. And I don't think many Owl teams are going to be willing. I don't think there's necessarily going to be a meeting of the minds. There may be a meeting of the minds, but I don't expect there to be a meeting of the minds. Okay. So it's just like ranked, where someone says that player's a witch and everyone else piles on. uh, Do you think the teams you coach would win more if you could shot call while they play? Not to throw shade on any of the player shot callers, of course. My shot calling right now is rusty, but my shot calling, I've probably only ever had one player that actually shot called at my level. I have had one player that shot called at my level when my shot calling was actually good, and that was great, and I loved working with them. But yes, my other teams would have, if I was allowed to shot call, even if I didn't get a sky cam, I had to work from one of my players' perspective locked to it. Yes, all but one of my teams would have been better if I shot called, and probably that team would have been better too, because it would have freed up more mental process for that player to focus more on his individual game. So yes, but Overwatch doesn't allow for that. There's some other stuff that does. There's some other things where like the shot caller is a very serious position, etc., that allow for that, but Overwatch currently isn't structured like that, and it doesn't need to be. It's fine that it's not. Real Overwatch coaching says 55-45 with 30% swings either way due to mental. Right, you got it. This season, maybe you could beat the Shock with good mental. What team am I driving to do that? I haven't had enough time. Oh, this season, not me specifically, but someone could beat the Shock with good mental. Yes, yes. There's a few teams that could, on a good day for them, beat the Shock. Yes. Spitfire getting those good mentals. Okay, the NFL comparison from that guy mentioned you don't have to be better to coach someone is something a lot of people probably need to know. Credentials of SR taken a bit too seriously sometimes. Yeah, it's much better than it used to be, but those still exist. Those still get asked for. Big business brain, free 1,000 hours of work. I'm going to intern for experience. I'm going to create creative work for you for exposure. No, no, I will not do either of those things. Uh, It would be cool to have a 7v7 Overwatch tournament where the seventh player is a shot caller. I mean, it would, but it wouldn't be official enough, and I don't know that I would do the work to get back into that level for that if there was only ever going to be one tournament for it. You follow what I'm saying? Like, does it make sense for people who are really good at that to go, hey, I'm going to go train back up to do that. I'm going to go do my work to do that if there's only going to be one tournament. It's kind of like when I think Jane did a tournament with hero bands, and it's like, okay, that's cool, but if there's only ever one of these, or there's one of these every 6 months, it doesn't really make sense to get all that serious about your training for it. Is Temporal the best shot caller ever? Quite possibly. We're due. Yeah, we're past due for another service scrim. I'll get one scheduled. You got to run Game Buster Becky up to handle 2v6 on Shock. There we go. There we go. If Shock plays Ryan, play Jumbo, and he'll tank the Fire Strikes. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Okay. Do I see anything else that got interesting down here? No, nothing else that got interesting. So I think we are actually good to go on this one. If you guys are enjoying the content, again, please do like and subscribe, as that helps out quite a bit. If you have any final questions or comments to throw up there, now is the time. And if you guys are watching this as a VOD and go, hey, I wish I'd been here for this, I wish I'd been able to participate, the best way to see when these go live is to go, hey, join the Discord in the description below, go down to the get notifications section under streaming, and then react to the image there. And if you react, you'll go ahead and then you'll get pings when I go live in the streaming live channel, and that'll tell you what topic is being covered or what hero or rank is being reviewed, things like that. So you can go, oh, I can be here for that, to ask questions, to participate when we're covering something like how much do coaches coach, all that good stuff. Okay. Now just need some Sigma goats. Crunch. Any VOD reviews coming up today? Yeah, I'll do at least one streamed VOD review today, and then I'll do an upload as well. I may do more than that, but there will be some VOD reviews today. Okay. I think that's gonna do it. Thanks, guys. Temporal out.